Hey guys, how are you all beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine. And yes, this is next part of Godlike Hokage in Naruto. The Gura Gura no Mi is known as the strongest fruit in the world of One Piece. In Naruto world, the blood limit would grant the strongest power for those ninjas. But what if the Gura Gura no Mi is found in the world of Naruto and after it is eaten it will be like a blood limit power? Well, the MC just took that fruit. This story begins before the Second Ninja War by 2 years. So let's start without any delay. Looking at Naito standing there, the fourth Mitsukage smiled, but the sense of tension in his eyes couldn't be concealed. He didn't know when Naito has come to the Mist Village, nor the reason behind his visit. He knew only one thing: he must not offend Naito in any way. That scene from 3 years ago in the Five Kages meeting was still vivid in his eyes. Although the fourth Mitsukage was the strongest among all of the previous generations and has confidence in his strength, in the face of the Kages, even if he thinks he can win, it would be tough to kill one of them. However, these same Kages seemed like kids in front of Naito. Almost like a toy, being played on the palm of the hand. Naito's strength, even for him, is as unreachable as the gates of heaven. It seems that the Kaguya clan has launched a rebellion. But this kid belongs to me from now on, and you have no choice but to accept. Naito looked at the fourth Mitsukage and said lightly. Upon saying that, Naito glanced at Kimimru next to him, while Haku looked at him and greeted him kindly. Kimimru looked confused and lost, to the point that he subconsciously responded to Haku, who greeted him. Then he looked at Naito with a trace of awe, which was evident in his eyelids. At this time, the Mitsukage noticed Kimimru on the side, then frowned slightly, but without any hesitation, he nodded immediately. Of course, no problem. I didn't expect that you would be interested in this child too. In this case, I will just give up on the idea. Orochimaru suddenly came over from the rear. Although the original purpose of this trip was to get Kimimru, it seems now that Naito also wants him. He naturally wouldn't dare to compete with Naito. Orochimaru. The Mitsukage saw Orochimaru, then his eyes became very old. For the past 3 years, Orochimaru kept roaming in the land of water, and he was aware of this. Although Orochimaru was a rogue ninja, his situation was completely different. He could efficiently deal with him because he knew why he was in the land of water. If Naito wasn't here, he would have dealt with him at once. However, the Mitsukage didn't know what kind of relationship these two shared, and naturally, he didn't dare to act recklessly. Don't show that kind of look. Rest assured, I don't wish for the Mist Village no harm, and this rebellion has nothing to do with me. Orochimaru spread his hand in front of the Mitsukage, showing a slightly evil expression. The fourth Mitsukage hummed coldly, ignoring Orochimaru, but kept looking at Naito. However, Naito didn't bother to care about the Mitsukage but looked at Kimimru and Haku on the side. At this time, the two kids had already started talking, and they looked quite fit for each other. Kimimru could teach Haku how to be tough, and the latter could teach him how to be soft too. If you don't have anyone, just go with us, Master Naito wouldn't mind. Haku smiled kindly at Kimimru. Kimimru looked at Haku with confusion, then suddenly asked, "Why are you following him?" "Because Naito-sama needs me, this is the purpose of my life." Listening to Haku's words, Kimimru showed a strange expression and couldn't help but remember his past. He was disgusted and feared by his own people, he existed to be a killing machine. He was kept in a prison cage, wondering what to do, wondering why he's still alive. He hated that feeling. He also wanted to find a meaning for his life, a purpose. Every life is meaningful, everyone has a purpose, but you're the only one who could find it. You can live for yourself, for something, or for someone. Naito looked at Kimimru, then suddenly said. His words made both Kimimru and Haku's eyes open wide brightly. Only the Mitsukage and Orochimaru weren't moved by Naito's words. Kimimru then looked at Haku, then Naito with awe, and finally nodded firmly. Upon seeing this, Orochimaru shook his head, then turned away. The fourth Mitsukage continued to observe Naito cautiously. Kimimru was also looking at the Mitsukage with vigilance. He feared both of them. His heart was trembling with horror, but besides that awe, he felt from Naito, a new feeling of admiration in his heart has appeared. I will have to pass this time, but I will surely come to visit again. Naito looked at the fourth Mitsukage and said casually. He then took Haku and Kimimru and turned to leave. Naito already knew where the Akatsuki base was, and naturally, there was no need to continue. The Kaguya rebellion against the Mist Village had nothing to do with Naito. The fourth Mitsukage smiled, looking at Naito's back, then said, "You will always be welcomed." Of course, he didn't mean that. Up until this moment, his stomach was turning upside down. He didn't know the reason behind this sudden visit. The fact that he found out that such a dangerous man was wandering around his village has made him tremble with fear inside. Now he could finally feel relaxed. Looking at Naito and the others leaving, Mai turned to the Mitsukage waiting for her further orders. "Mitsukage-sama. Go back and get rid of the Kaguya clan." The expression on the Mitsukage's face gradually became cold. Mai hesitated for a moment, then said, "But, that kid. It doesn't matter." The fourth Mitsukage took a deep breath, and with endless fear in his eyes, he said, "Since he was taken away by Naito, he's distinctly different from those dumb Kaguya's clansmen. Remember this, if you ever re-encounter him in the future, you shouldn't treat him as an enemy. Don't you dare to provoke him. If you must, don't even look him in the eyes. Do you understand?" "Yes." Mai nodded firmly, but she found it hard to calm down for a long time. With just a few words, she finally understood why the Mitsukage didn't dare to continue hunting Kimimru. Because he was under the wings of the god of Shinobi, the strongest man alive, whom his word is above all other people. Mist Village, in a mountain range. From the outside, this was just a deserted mountain range, but inside it, there was a large, secret base. This was the base of the Akatsuki. At that moment, and in the deepest part of the base, a huge statue was standing there, with 4 people in front of it. One of them was Nagato. Unlike the original, he didn't need to connect himself to the demonic statue to revenge Yoriko. However, the constant use of the Rinnegan has weakened his body. He looked fragile and thin. The person standing in front of Nagato was White Zetsu, who was wearing the red cloak of the Akatsuki. Black Zetsu wasn't connected to him at the time. On the left side of Nagato, a vicious, strange person was lying there on the ground. He looked like a humpbacked person. He also wore the Akatsuki's cloak. On the right, a person who was wearing the Akatsuki's cloak, with an evil expression stood there. He also had a huge bandaged person on his back. These 2 people were Sasori of the Red Sand Dawn and Hoshigeki Kaizame. Naito originally killed all of the 7 legendary swordsmen of the mist. He also destroyed 2 of their swords. However, due to the special nature of the Kubakiri Bocho sword, it could be restored. Therefore, 6 swords remained. Among them is Same Harder, who is being held now by Kaizame. "I just got the news. Naito came to the Mist Village. He's currently in the Land of Water. He's probably looking for us." Nagato looked at Sasori and Kai'Same, then widened his eyes. If this is the case, then the base will be transferred. We must leave the land of water. Kai'Same grinned, and with a strange light flashed in his eyes, he said, "You Naito, the god of shinobi." Sasori then hummed, and said with a dull tone, "So we're changing our base just because of this, you Naito? I heard that all of the 7 legendary swordsmen of the mist got killed by him. If this is true, then this guy's strength is indeed unbelievable." Kai'Same took out his huge sword, revealing a look of interest. Again with his dull, rough tone, Sasori said, "Even though you still want to play against him?" Kai'Same revealed his creepy sharp teeth and said, "No, I'm just curious, how can a human being have such power? Moreover, even if he's strong, the location of this base cannot be easily found." Nagato looked at Kai'Same, then shook his head, and said, "No, you don't know how strong he is. You must not fight with him." Although Kai'Same looked very interested in Naito's power, he knew that he shouldn't try his luck with him. And when he heard Nagato's words, he couldn't help but ask, "Then what should we do next?" "Transfer the base now." Sasori snorted, then turned around at Nagato, saying, "Don't worry. He won't find this place. I don't need to worry, huh?" At this time, Zetsu, who had been standing in front of him, suddenly showed a startled expression, then said helplessly, "Because he's already here." Whoosh! As soon as he said these words, a horrifying shock wave hit the base. From the moment it appeared to the moment it hit them, only Nagato sensed this attack coming with his Rinnegan, and barely dodged it. The shock wave hit the ground. Nagato managed barely to survive this one, but Zetsu wasn't as fortunate. He was hit by it directly, and lost his head. What? Sudden changes occurred in the situation. Sasori and Kai'Same seemed terrified, then immediately looked up. Above them, there was a thick rock roof, and they couldn't see anyone there. It was as if this shock wave has appeared out of thin air. "Where is the enemy?" Sasori said with his rough sound, then with great vigilance kept looking everywhere, ready for the next attack. Zetsu's headless body froze in its place, and just when Nagato wanted to rush toward him, a line suddenly appeared in the middle of his forehead, then straightly spread under his nose. Silence. White Zetsu's body, together with the Akatsuki cloak, got neatly split into halves from the middle. Sasori and Kai'Same couldn't even react, the two froze in their places with shocked expressions. Kaka. The only sound they could hear is the one that emitted along with the splitting of White Zetsu's body. It seemed like the sound of tearing papers. The line spread to the side and reached the rock wall behind White Zetsu, splitting it deeply. Suddenly, the entire base split openly. Bang! Not only the base from the inside but also the roof. Actually, the mountain itself that was holding the base got divided into two halves instantly. Looking up, the roof split, then cracks spread to the top until they could finally see the sky outside. The sun fell from the cracks as if it was forming a line of sky-like scenery. And one could only wonder what kind of a sword could be huge enough to not only cut a whole base but also an entire mountain into two. The mountain crumbled as if a god has smitten it. The sunlight fell inside the cage, and from that light, a shadow gradually extended. Naito walked step by step, holding a 3-foot golden sword in his hand. After a few levels, he was inside Akatsuki's base. The god of shinobi. You Naito. Looking at Naito's figure, whether it was Sasori or Kai'Same, the two were extremely shocked. With one strike from his sword, he cut the entire mountain. The strength of this attack alone is definitely worthy of the name God of Shinobi. Such the strength is indeed on a whole other level. Nagato apparently didn't expect that Naito would find them this quickly. They had just got the news that he has appeared in the Mist Village. Naito looked at them as a true god, with some sort of indifference, as if he was overlooking the world. With every step he took forward, the momentum seemed as if it was gonna penetrate the sky. This momentum put a lot of pressure on the people inside. Only Nagato could resist it with his Rinnegan, while both Sasori and Kaizen began to feel intense oppression. Watching Naito walking toward them, Sasori hiding inside his puppet finally rushed. He couldn't hold back any longer. He knew that if he stood there any longer, this momentum would crush his will, and taking a shot might become so difficult later. Thus, he took his chance. Even if Naito is the god of Shinobi, he is also the strongest puppet user. He never considers himself weaker than anyone. Whoosh! Suddenly a tail came out of his puppet with numerous blades, then tried to strike Naito away fiercely. At the same time, part of his body opened, and a bunch of poisonous steel needles flew toward Naito. However, Naito didn't look at him and didn't even swing his sword. He completely ignored his existence, and continued to walk forward. Whoosh! The tail and the countless needles suddenly froze in midair just 1 foot before reaching Naito's body. It looked as if it has hit a white translucent barrier. It actually looked a little bit like the Shinra Tensei, but the two were completely different things. If you look closely, you can see that this barrier is entirely composed of dense white cracks. Ding ding dong. The moment it touched that barrier, it stagnated in the air, then got shattered inch by inch. Even that tail that was made of stainless steel got broken into pieces, then fell on the ground. This guy. Kaizen kept looking at Naito, who was still walking forward, then used a hand sign, and a huge chakra started mobilizing inside his body, almost on the same level as a Baijua. Water release, big water, shockwave. The seal was completed in an instant, and the water release rushed toward Naito, filling the entire base. The water flow didn't stop and continued to spread away. The whole mountain was utterly turned into a vast lake. Sasori jumped directly to the top, then landed on the side of the lake. Nagato came to the top, then stood right beside them. It turned out that Kaizen is capable of creating such a huge lake. Would he be able to face Naito? White Zetsu, who kept hiding after he got hit by Naito's strike the entire time, asked. "It's hard," Sasori said as he was staring down. Nagato kept quiet. He knew for a fact that facing Naito is not only difficult for Kaizen but impossible. He was now only thinking of a way to get rid of Naito while escaping. The reason why he didn't immediately turn around and escape was that he didn't believe he could retreat. Naito can fly and can move underground, his speed is breaknecking, and he's almost perfect in all aspects. Your only hope is to stay hidden, but Naito has already found them. It will be difficult to just escape now. Boom! Just when he started thinking and stayed silent, the entire mountain burst. At most, it only lasted for a few breaths. It's as if someone has placed a deep water bomb inside the lake, which has completely blasted it apart, making the water splash all of the place, reaching the sky. Whoosh! The water rushed in all directions, following the paths inside this mountain range, then gradually disappeared. The god of Shinobi is really strong. The water dispersed, leaving only 2 people inside the field. Kaizen's body turned into the form of a shark, dripping with blood. His lower body has completely disappeared. But in that bloodbath, Kaizen grinned at Naito, without showing the slightest of fear. He felt excited just to see the power of the god of Shinobi. Naito looked at Kai's-aim indifferently, his eyes were dull, he didn't say anything, he only swung his sword one more time. Crack! The air blew out and spread. The shock wave flew toward Kai's-aim, then completely broke his body apart. The bloodshed then flowed into the stream of water, changing its color to red. The blood didn't reach Naito, his clothes didn't even show any signs of being wet. As if he wasn't inside that lake in the first place, he was untouchable. Bansho Tenin. At the moment when the lake burst and Kai's-aim died, Nagato finally took a shot. Trying to caught Naito off his guard, he used the force of gravity that seemed to be irresistible and then tried to pull Naito fiercely. However, even though this gravity force seemed like it was gonna tear the top of the mountain off, Naito's body didn't move an inch. Naito continued to walk towards Nagato. The Bansho Tenin didn't have any effect on Naito's body, and it got easily defeated by the shock force. Naito seemed as if he was an unshakable giant. No matter how fierce and strong the gravity force, Naito could not be moved. Looking at Naito walking toward him, step by step, even Nagato seemed like he did no longer know how to fight back, and felt some sort of weakness in his heart. It's not that he is weak, but Naito is the one that is too strong, so powerful that he makes people desperate. Sasori, who was looking at Naito approaching them, didn't look afraid, even though Kai's-aim got easily killed by Naito. Instead, he looked excited, pinning his eyes on Naito as if he was looking at a perfect artwork. Red Secret Technique, Performance of 100 Puppets. Sasori's puppet body broke apart, then he emerged out of it with his original body, the one that he converged into a puppet. He called this a perfect artwork, as it was his final form. Immediately, he ripped off a piece of his chest, then threw out a scroll. Puff! In the white smoke, hundreds of shadows appeared in the sky, and from his chest, countless chakra rays appeared accurately connecting him to each puppet out there. What a shocking scene! This was his ultimate puppet technique. Only Sasori, who successfully managed to turn his body into a puppet, could perform this technique. Up until this moment, the limit was 10 puppets for each finger. The shinobi who could control this much would be called a puppet master. Naito, the god of shinobi. A smug grin appeared on Sasori's face as he was looking at Naito. He seemed extremely confident. Even the god of shinobi wouldn't make him afraid, because he was the strongest puppet master alive. Controlling hundreds of puppets, Sasori attacked Naito violently. Whoosh! Whoosh! With these overwhelming numbers, the puppets launched various attacks: poisonous needles, hidden weapons, sharp blades. A storm of threats fell head-on straight toward Naito. Even Nagato, on the side, was slightly moved by this scene. Although he was confident that no weapon can mean him any harm if he counters it with his Shinra Tensei, still, the view was extremely terrifying. At least, compared to other puppet masters, Sasori was on another different level. He could crush any opponent with ease using this technique. However, this was his limit. For a ninja like him, who is classified as a Kage-level shinobi, it was impossible for him to compete with a super Kage shinobi level. No matter how strong he was like an ant compared to them, not to mention Naito, who has already stepped into the 6th path level. Looking at this scene, Naito couldn't help but remember the time when he fought against Kyo a long time ago during the Second World Shinobi War. Sasori, you may have really reached the ultimate level for Puppet Master. Looking at the sky, Naito spoke for the first time. Unfortunately, this is your limit. While talking, Naito raised his Kusanagi sword, then waved it at the sky. Crack! A white halo light burst in the sky. All the attack, and the puppets got all fixed in midair at this moment as if time has stopped still. This attack seemed as if it has shattered the emptiness of the void. All of a sudden, the sky looked as if it has turned into a large mirror, then started breaking and cracking, then collapsing under Naito's sword attack. Crack! In seconds, the weapon storm, and all of the puppets, under Naito's shock force shattered. The puppets didn't only break apart but directly got shattered into small pieces, some even turned into a powder. There was no way to recover them again, they got utterly destroyed. With that, all of the chakra rays that were coming out of Sasori's chest vanished. Watching his own puppets destroyed by Naito's sword attack, Sasori got extremely shocked. His attack was utterly vulnerable in front of Naito. He knew that he wasn't qualified to be Naito's opponent, but he didn't expect the gap to be this big. It's as big as the distance between heaven and earth. Even he, a puppet master that almost stands on the peak, could only feel his own smallness in front of Naito. This is the power of God. With a shocked and complicated expression, he looked at Naito, then unconvincingly said, "Even if you're strong today, your power will eventually turn into dust. Only true art is eternal." "You're wrong." Naito looked at Sasori then said calmly, "You're mistaking eternity for weakness. Without absolute power, even if the life is endless, it will not be eternal, you will never be called immortal, just like your case now, a weak mortal. Look whose power has turned into dust, this alone proves that the power you possess is not absolute. True power cannot be eroded by time." Upon saying that, Naito swung his sword for the last time. At the last second before his death, Sasori's gazes got lowered slightly, as if he was asking himself, "So, this is the true answer?" Facing Naito's visible shock wave, Sasori didn't have the slightest intention to avoid, and in a matter of seconds, his body turned into powder and completely disappeared. Solely with 2 strikes, Naito finished Sasori, then his eyes directly fell on Nagato again. Naito looked at him indifferently. Nagato was unable to raise any emotions inside Naito's heart, because to him, Nagato was already a dead person. "It seems that you, the man who has become the god of Shinobi, is no longer as cautious and calm as before. You have simply become arrogant." Nagato didn't try to run from this confrontation, he stared directly at Naito, and from his Rinnegan eyes, a mighty aura burst out, making the ground tremble around. This wasn't the Shinra Tensei, it was merely his pure aura. "Do you think people should be cautious when they encounter ants on the road?" Naito could feel that aura coming out of the Rinnegan eyes, but his gazes were still very calm. Naito didn't attack right away, because he was still considering if he should keep those Rinnegan eyes. With Naito's current strength, he could clearly feel the power of the Rinnegan, which can also be considered as one of the forms of the Sixth Path's forces. In essence, this power was more reliable than what Naito has currently reached. After all, even though Naito had a perfect Sage mode, and also had the reverse Hakemon Tonku and the Soul Art combined together, they still couldn't help him awaken his Sixth Path mode. Perhaps the power of the shock force alone is enough to defeat Nagato, however, Naito's chakra and body were still not up to the standard to awaken the Sixth Path mode. Unfortunately, Nagato cannot use the real power of his Rinnegan. If it was Uchiha Madara in his heyday, he would have easily awakened the real power of his Rinnegan eyes, Limbo. Using this technique, no one lower than the Sixth Path level would be able to stand against him because those who don't possess the Sixth Path forces cannot detect his shadows at all. This was the qualitative gap between the two. Even Hashirama, who has the perfect Sage mode, will still be inferior because he wouldn't have any way to resist the real power of the Sixth Path force. The limbo alone will cause him a lot of trouble. It's an invisible world that coexists with the physical realm, but that is ordinarily impossible to detect, not to mention the difficulty of fighting against Madara's shadow attacks that coming from that dimension. Nagato stared at Naito darkly. He regarded Naito as the evil that exists in this world that prevents peace from happening, and he was absolutely disgusted by those who want to stop order and destroy it. It won't be easy to stop peace. Ragely, the Jidomazo that was buried under the mountain peak suddenly punched out his way out under the Nagato's control. Bang! The mountain peak exploded. The Jidomazo could easily smash his way out. Nagato jumped to the top of the Jidomazo's head, and took this chance to do a hand sign, and gather his chakra madly, while the Jidomazo rushed toward Naito violently. Stop peace, ha! Naito looked at the Jidomazo without the slightest movement, but this was due to the sentence that he heard before from Nagato. He couldn't help but sneer. In fact, Naito wouldn't have anything against Nagato if the former didn't try to kill Kushina before. After all, he was an Uzumaki, one of the few members left from her same clan. He wouldn't touch him even if he tried to provoke Naito, or also if he worked for Madara, but trying to kill Kushina was the bottom line. Facing the Jidomazo's piercing punch, Naito felt interested in testing the strength of the Juubi's vessel, so he met it with his fist. The size was incomparable. One finger from the Jidomazo's hand was much larger than Naito himself. However, when the two fists crashed into each other, the two froze in the air at the same time. Bang! Suddenly, the world trembled. In the small void between the two fists, a terrifying invisible wave mark erupted, rippling in all directions. No matter where it swayed, whether it was a tree, a rock, or a mountain peak, all got destroyed in a split second. The impact made the ground under them crack open, and the sky above them shake as if it was gonna fall on them. Under the confrontation of this power, Naito's body remained unmovable. Finally, a cracking sound emitted from the Jidomazo's fist. Facing Naito's powerful shock force, it ultimately could no longer resist, and got repelled. This guy, Nagato, who was standing on the top of the Jidomazo, couldn't help but feel a bit horrified, looking at this scene. Since he was the one controlling it, he knew how powerful the Jidomazo was. Although it was just a vessel, its power is still not what humans can resist. At least he knew that even his Shinra Tensei is not strong enough to shake the Jidomazo. Because it wasn't just any vessel, it was the Juubi's. Still, he got easily blown away by a punch from Naito. What kind of strength did Naito has reached? In spite of this horror, Nagato could only clench his teeth, and continue gathering chakra, while controlling the Jidomazo to attack Naito. Even if you're strong, you wouldn't easily defeat the Jidomazo. Nagato knew a thing or two about the Juubi, but he didn't know anything about the infinite Tsukuyomi. He was planning on using him to make the world feel pain and prevent war. The Jidomazo was the Juubi's shell, and even if it's just an empty one, its defense was unimaginable. Seeing how his last punch could repel the Jidomazo but didn't do any visible damage on him didn't make Naito lose his calmness. On the contrary, Naito was as calm as ever. It's strong, sure, but the question is, how strong can this empty shell be? Faintly speaking, a horrific momentum burst out of Naito's body, and instantly shook the world, shattering even the white clouds in the sky. With two hands on the golden Kusanagi sword's handle, a horrible amount of shock force condensed, causing the surrounding space to crack. Then he suddenly waved from top to bottom toward the Jidomazo. Whoosh! When the blade fell, when the sword fell, that terrifying force converged into one line, then broke out fiercely. At the sword's edge, a horrifying distortion in the space erupted, and a faint black line could be seen, which was proof of the space real torn. With Naito's full force, combined with the strength of the Kusanagi sword, the shock force became almost qualified to truly tear space. Although that black line has only appeared for a moment, it extremely twisted and bent the space, then spread in an instant. Nagato, who was standing on the top of the Jidomazo's head, has been observing this horrible power with his Rinnegan, couldn't help but feel terrified, and without any hesitation, he tried to evade sideways in advance. However, the Jidomazo's body was vast and simply couldn't avoid such an attack. Thus, Nagato chose to attack instead of just resisting this attack and controlled the Jidomazo to crush Naito with his fist. Just when that fist was about to fall, a strange force crossed through his body then swept to the endless sky. Silence. The Jidomazo's huge body stagnated as if time was fixed at that moment. Suddenly a line visible to the naked eye appeared on its body. This line spread away instantly and swept from the head straight to the bottom of its body. Under Nagato's shocked gazes, suddenly, the Jidomazo got cut into two halves. Under Naito's full force shock wave, he nearly tore the space and cut the Juubi's vessel like a knife through butter. Bang! A loud sound emitted along with the two halves of the Jidomazo falling on the ground. A light green liquid suddenly flowed out of the Jidomazo's body, which felt that it was condensed with endless vitality. Madara relied on that liquid to barely stay alive, and even used it to restore his old body, and fight Naito for one last time. Naito didn't know what Madara was planning, but since he dared to fight him at that moment, he should have some kind of a plan to resurrect later. However, Naito didn't have the slightest fear of this outcome. Resurrection. Then he will get killed again. Naito stared coldly at the Jidomazo. I think that's it then. Whoosh. Just when the Jidomazo two separated sections hit the ground, it suddenly disappeared out of thin air. It seems that since the Jidomazo is the Juubi's vessel, it cannot be destroyed entirely, just like Juubi itself, it will be resurrected again. However, that won't be instant, it will take some time to appear again. To be precise, the Jidomazo is composed of natural energy. It came to life through the use of the sixth path's force. Just like the Baijua, it's a living existence. The Juubi is an immortal existence, which can only be sealed not killed, and the same can be said about the Jidomazo. Otherwise, if the Juubi's vessel could be easily destroyed, Hagoromo would have done it himself and eliminated any chance for Kaguya to be resurrected. However, since Naito managed to cut the Jidomazo's body, it also proves the fact that he's capable of cutting off the Juubi. The Juubi is a simple-minded colossal beast that doesn't know how to use its strength. And his Jinchuriki wouldn't be easy to use all of its power. In other words, Naito now has the power to surpass the Juubi's Jinchuriki. Of course, this wasn't it. Naito could feel his soul transforming and stepping into the sixth path level. At that time, Naito will finally be able to open the seventh gate. Even if it's the Juubi's Jinchuriki or sixth path Madara, Naito's strength will surpass them all. At that point, perhaps the only person who could be a threat to Naito will be Kaguya, who was still far from being resurrected. Compared to her, Nagato now could only feel terrified. Nagato landed on the ground, barely avoiding Naito's attack, couldn't help but stand there looking at him with his Rinnegan. Naito's attack has almost reached him, which chilled his spine and made him tremble. This is impossible, the Jidomazo got. Nagato was still maintaining his hand sign while gathering his chakra, but the look on his face was indescribable. Naito didn't just break his defense, but with one strike from his sword, he cut him into two halves, which made him feel terrified. His power is simply incredible. Damn. Nagato could notice the dark and cold gazes that Naito was giving him, thus, he clenched his teeth and stopped gathering his chakra. Ultra Chibaku Tensei. During all of that time, Nagato was gathering chakra, and even draining his vitality, to make the strongest Chibaku Tensei he could use. Since he couldn't confront Naito directly, and any technique he could use would easily get defeated, then he could only rely on his strongest seal ability. If you have both the power of the yin and yang inside your body, you would be able to seal even the mother of all shinobis, Kaguya. Originally, Kaguya was sealed by this technique, and after that seal, the moon was formed. Hagoromo's younger brother's descendants lived on the moon since then and guarded the seal for generations. Until Madara opened the seal. However, Kaguya lives on through her will manifestation in Black Zetsu. Hagoromo's soul is immortal, but Kaguya's both chakra and soul are immortals, but most of her chakra got divided between the Juubi and the Shinobi living in this world. Her true will, or soul, is sealed inside of the moon and cannot break out. Unlike Hagoromo, who has always been observing the development of this world. That black ball that was created by Nagato had actually produced a horrible gravitation force. In fact, this technique could also be called Ultra Bansho Tenin. After that, the black ball flew up into the sky, coinciding with the sun, blocking most of its light. The darkness came upon the earth as if it was the doomsday. At that moment, a horrible gravitational explosion broke out. Crack! Crack! The ground trembled and cracked horribly. Under this terrifying force, the entire mountain range shattered, turning into numerous rocks that flew to the sky, converging on the black ball. Whoosh! The crack spread in all directions on the ground, and the rocks kept flying to space, turning the black ball into a small moon floating above the sky. It's not even over. The amount of chakra that Nagato has gathered was enormous because he didn't only rely on his own chakra or his own vitality, he even used some of the Jidomazo's. Block of rocks from the ground got lifted and flew to the sky, making the new moon in the sky bigger. The range mountain suddenly turned into a deep valley. Countless dirt and rocks have flown into the sky, converging into the massive star in the air. This was indeed extremely shocking. Naito looked at this scene while still standing on the ground. This gravitation force seemed like it has reversed heaven with earth, turning the field into the sky. Naito was using his shock force to prevent his body from flying to the center of that black ball. Looking at this scene, Nagato shouted madly with his hands crossing each other against his chest, and suddenly the gravitation force became stronger, tearing Naito's body, pulling him in to seal him for good. You used the Jidomazo as a decoy, and gathered all of your chakra to use Chibaku Tensei. Was this your intention from the start, Nagato? Floating in the air, Naito glanced up at the star, then looked down at Nagato on the ground. But his expression remained as always indifferent as if he was playing with a child. But, nothing is new as always. Faintly said, Naito holding his sword, he waved it toward the sky. This strike wasn't as dangerous as it looked when he cut off the Jidomazo, it seemed like any ordinary wave. But from that wave, a sudden distortion appeared in the space. Whoosh! In an instant, the shock force reached that meteorite in the sky and cracked it open. The cracks and ripples seemed to be slow, but it was actually speedy. Just in seconds, that vast meteorite got cut off into two halves. Whoosh! The light that emitted by it was extremely dazzling. Suddenly, the white color controlled the entire battlefield. The meteorite got shattered into pieces. and endless gravel and dust fell from the sky on Naito's head. But the latter didn't look at it. Instead, he rushed to the ground, then clenched his fist and swung it to the sky. Crack! Suddenly all of that gravel turned into powder, and the sky got clear again. When all of the dust got settled, the battlefield looked as if it got shoveled, with large vast pits everywhere. If you look at it from the sky, it might seem normal, but if you know what has just happened, you wouldn't help but feel shocked. Because the battlefield has changed a lot. A few moments ago, this was a range mountain. Naito looked around with his Kusanagi sword in his hand. But there was no one near. It seems that when Naito destroyed the meteorites, Nagato decided to escape. However, even with Zetsu's help, under Naito's Ultra Perceive, he could quickly determine his whereabouts. Whoosh! Suddenly a shock wave crossed the underground, tearing everything in its path, and finally reached Nagato, who was being wrapped by Zetsu to sneak him underground. The blood got shed, and Nagato's body instantly got cut from the shoulder to the waist and fell on the ground. Naito stepped forward, then suddenly flashed in front of Nagato, who was taking his last breaths. If Naito didn't want to keep the Rinnegan, he would have directly bombarded him, turning him into powder. In fact, he found it very hard to control his power and not crush him directly. With half of his body separated from the other on the ground, Nagato's eyes showed a hint of despair. Sure enough, he couldn't escape from Naito's grasp. He went all out, using the Jidomazo's power, and the Ultra Chibaku Tensei, but everything was useless in front of Naito. He couldn't even stop his movements for a moment. Last time, Naito didn't have such power. Although he stopped his Shinra Tensei, he didn't feel this powerful. But this time, Naito not only destroyed his Ultra Chibaku Tensei but also cut him into 2 pieces. Even now, Nagato couldn't figure out why Naito was so strong. How could he have such strength? Even his Rinnegan was utterly vulnerable in front of him. Nagato couldn't figure it out, and even Madara and Black Zetsu couldn't understand it. Naito, how can he be so strong? 2 young figures rushed through the forest. Looking at the sky ahead, feeling terrified, Haku and Kimimru were extremely shocked. Especially when they saw that scene previously in the sky, it seemed as if a massive star has appeared. That scene made the 2 boys almost stop and keep away. But Haku was worried, which made him even run faster than Kimimru. HolyOniiSama. The scene was too shocking, which made Haku clench his fist tightly. He became anxious, unaware of what happened to Naito. Even though he knew how strong he is and how he would be useless to him in such a situation, Haku couldn't help but rush toward him. Finally, the 2 reached the battlefield. In other words, the battlefield, which was a mountain range a moment ago. The moment they stepped to that place, the 2 got stunned. In the middle of the gravel, there was a huge pit that was almost bottomless. You could call it a valley, but it was too big. On the side of that valley, there was a terrifying fissure, which spread all the way in the distance. There were also several holes, pits, and cracks all around the place. On the side, they finally saw Naito. A white cloak, without any trace of dirt or dust, Naito stood there calmly. Why didn't you 2 just wait? Naito turned to Haku and Kimimru. Now that he said it, Haku and Kimimru remembered that Naito has told them to wait. While he's going, he talked about going to do a quick thingy. Is that what HolyOniiSama calls a quick thingy? Naito had already sensed Haku and Kimimru coming, but because everything was over, he didn't stop them. When they reached the top of the mountain, he turned to look at them. Whoosh! Suddenly, Naito flashed, then appeared from nowhere in front of the two of them. At this time, Haku and Kimimru finally woke up from their shock. A shameful expression appeared on Haku's face, then said with a light tone, "Because I saw that big meteorite in the sky, I got worried about your safety, Naito-sama, so." "Bad boy." Naito raised his hand, then poked Haku's forehead with his finger. Then he turned toward Kimimru, and said, "I would expect something like this from Haku. But you actually followed him and disobeyed my orders." Kimimru got startled, then looked at Haku next to him. He didn't know what to say, he couldn't just put the blame on Haku. Haku then weakly looked at Naito, and whispered, "It's all my fault, Naito-sensei, punish me instead." Looking at the two children, Naito shook his head helplessly, and said, "I will let this one slide, don't you dare to disobey my orders next time." "Yes." Haku and Kimimru nodded firmly. "Let's go." After saying that, Haku and Kimimru followed Naito down the hillside. After that, he turned around once again, then pressed his hand toward the void. Bang! The mountain roared. Under the watchful eyes of the Haku and Kimimru, the range mountain got shattered into pieces, filling the valley in the middle again. At this point, this mountain range has been completely leveled, only some gravels and a few broken blocks of wood have remained, and nothing else. With the death of Nagato, the Akatsuki was already over. Black Zetsu wasn't there, otherwise, Naito wouldn't have let him go again. As for White Zetsu, there were too many copies of him. Unless you cut him from the root, he will never truly die. After killing Nagato, Naito chose to temporarily retain the Rinnegan. As for whether he plants it in his body, Naito has not yet decided and wasn't in a hurry to make his mind. After all, these eyes belong to Madara. No one can predict if Madara's consciousness was buried in it. After all, it's the sixth path's force. Naito's soul has begun to gradually transform. When it's finally done, Naito will truly step into the sixth path's level. Only then, he wouldn't fear if something was wrong with Rinnegan. So what he needed to do now is to complete the transformation of his soul. At this moment, in Naito's spiritual world, the energy of the dragon veins has completely disappeared, and it was getting blended with Naito's soul. The transformation of the soul could not be forced like the new opening of a gate. There was no door to break down, and Naito needed to be patient through this process. The difference between a sixth path soul and the soul of an ordinary ninja is really too big. Take Edo Tensei's case alone. When the soul of an ordinary ninja gets reincarnated, it wouldn't be able to take control of its will. However, if that ninjas have even put one foot into the sixth path's level, and possessed its power in any way, such as Madara, it would be impossible to control him. In the original, when the seal got finally lifted, and Madara's soul was getting out of his body, relying on the strength of his soul, Madara forced his soul to attach itself to his reincarnated body. At that moment, Madara took full control of his body. At that time, although his body didn't transform into the sixth path's mode, you can say that his soul was already at that level. Obito could also return from the afterlife and give his Sharingan to Kakashi. Precisely because he also awakened his sixth path's mode. Naito then took Haku and Kimimru and left the land of water. He didn't directly carry them while flying in the sky but took a ship to cross the sea safely. Speaking of which, Nanabe got caught, but Naito has never found it. He couldn't even summon him, which is also a strange thing. Naito thought he might have already got temporarily sealed inside the Jidomazo. It would have been nice to use him for travel. In a very luxurious and noble room inside a large merchant ship, Naito lay there quietly with his eyes closed. Haku and Kimimru were practicing. Rumble. The sky was thundering, and the rain was falling. The waves were consistently hitting the side of the ship, moving it up and down. Lying there, Naito kept his perception on the other room, while thinking about Kimimru. After he accepted him and instructed him while practicing, Naito found out that Kimimru was already suffering from that disease, although it was already undetectable at this time. In the original, Kimimru died from that disease at an early age. He would have grown to be very strong. Orochimaru was even considering him as a better vessel than Sasuke. Shikatsumiyaku is the kind of bloodline limit that gives you the ability to use your bones in battle. Therefore, the resilience of the body is also extremely powerful, nearly endures to be compared to Tsunade's strength of 100 seal. Kimimru can freely use bones from his body as a weapon to fight, and after being extracted, his skin will head instantly, and the bones in his body will grow again simultaneously. And more importantly, his bones are extremely hard, almost unbreakable. The only problem with this so-called perfect bloodline limit. It is the disease that comes with it, and everyone who has wielded the Shikatsumiyaku has suffered from it. However, only a few people have ever awakened it from the Kaguya clan. It's even rarer the appearance of the Sharingan in the Uchiha clan or the Ice Release in the Yuki clan. And it seems because of how strong Kimimru's bloodline limit was, his disease was even more fierce. Even Orochimaru and Kabuto were helpless. When he thought about it, Naito couldn't help but think of one thing only, the body transformation that he used on Anko and Kushina. The transformation that he operated on her improved her power and strengthened her body without any side effects. It seems that cursed seal that Orochimaru has used on Kimimru to heal his disease didn't work. Instead, it has even fastened its spreading. Naito stood there calmly, thinking about Orochimaru's cursed seal. The cursed seal is one of the projects that Orochimaru has studied hard to obtain. It's similar to the Sage Mode's strength. He has once said accurately that the cursed seal and the Ryuchi cave senjutsu have some kind of close connection. If anything goes wrong while practicing the Toad's Sage Mode, your body will be putrefied, but in the snake's case, you will get devoured by the White Snake Sage. Orochimaru has long been studying the cursed seal. Naito has once checked his research on it, and he was near completing it. Ordinary cursed seals are too weak, but the special one will grant enormous increases in power, but the side effect is too serious. Compared with the cursed seal, the body transformation was much perfect. The first stage of the transformation is stronger than the cursed seal of heaven, and it has only benefits and no side effects. And level 2 of the cursed seal of heaven is also weaker than the second stage of body transformation. The first two stages alone are completely above the cursed seal. After all, this seal was based on Orochimaru's research over the Ryuchi Cave Sage Mode, and Naito's transformation was based on his perfect Sage Mode. However, in the third stage, things get complicated. The person to be transformed must meet the conditions, at least his chakra must be above the Kage level. Because the third stage is almost equivalent to being in a permanent Sage Mode. Because Haku and Kimimru are too young, only 6 years old, Naito only gave them the first stage of the Sage Mode transformation and kept the second stage for the right time. And Kimimru was still too young for his disease to show up, thus, Naito wasn't sure whether the transformation of the Sage Mode could heal it. In theory, it should be possible because the final stage of the transformation awakes in the body the perfect Sage Mode, including the healing ability. His body would be already most perfect for the 6th path level. During this time, the sea water was constantly waving, carrying the large ship left and right. At this time, more than 20 dark shadows suddenly appeared in the distance, and they actually stepped foot on the sea surface and galloped towards the ship. The fierce storm and rain couldn't stop their footsteps, and the surging waves passed under their feet, unable to sink them into the sea. No doubt, they were ninjas. On the ship, someone saw them running on the sea, and immediately got startled, and a look of terror got drawn on his face. Damn it! Pirates! The land of water and the land of fire are separated by a sea, and the two countries are in a state of trading agreement, thus, the sea wasn't safe. Often, shinobi from other small villages will come to snatch the goods. Because it's on the sea, killing people is so simple, because it will easily devour everything, so even if Konoha and the Mist know this, they couldn't do anything about it. This is when missions come in handy. The owner of this large merchant ship was already prepared for this and hired 2 teams from the Mist village to escort them. These 2 teams have a total of 8 chunin, but no jonin leader. The attacking squad had more than 20 people. If they dared to act on such a large scale during the daytime, they would have been stopped by the Mist village or Konoha. But it was a stormy night. And since it was a good opportunity, the choice of this large merchant ship was their target. Soon the battle between the 2 squads started. In Naito's room, Kimimru and Haku, who were practicing, heard the noises outside, then stood up one after another, looking out the window. "Naito-sama, what do we do?" Seeing that Naito had been lying there comfortably, they thought that he was completely unaware of the situation outside. After waiting for a while, the 2 asked respectfully. Naito said casually, "I don't care." In fact, Naito had discovered their appearance the moment they stepped into the sea but was too lazy to bother. What made Naito slightly surprised was that the looting squad managed to suppress the Mist shinobis so easily. Some of the ninjas from the looting squad then set foot on the ship, showing a cruel smiling, prepared to loot one cabin after another. However, just when one of them was about to kick open the door, it got open on itself, and at the same time, a white spear pierced that man's chest. Blood splattered. The other 2 were frightened. They didn't expect that there were still ninjas. When they fell back, they could clearly see that white spear that took out their breaths. That white spear is actually a bone. Kimimru stepped out of the room and looked indifferently at the 2 ninjas, saying, "Get out of this ship, you're disturbing Master's rest." The 2 got frightened at first by that bone, but when they looked carefully at the other end of the bone, they noticed that he was just a kid. What? He's just a child. That guy was too careless. Such a shameful end to be killed by a kid. The 2 looked at the fallen corpse without showing any fear. At this moment, Haku came out from behind Kimimru and whispered, "Do you need my help?" "No need." Kimimru's eyes looked sharp, he wasn't as kind as Haku. In his opinion, all those who disturb his master should be damned. The next moment, Kimimru rushed toward the 2 men. Both of them were above the chunin level, but Kimimru was already very strong. With the first transformation of the Sage mode, Kimimru could easily suppress the 2 of them. Kimimru's movement looked so sharp that it made Haku feel envious of him. In the beginning, the 2 despised him, but soon, they were terrified and began to shout for the support of their companions, but before they could come, Kimimru finished one of them. The other got horrified and wanted to escape, which made killing him more easily. After he killed the 2 of them, Kimimru finally caught the attention of the ninjas in the distant battle. Because the Mist squad didn't have a jonin leader between them, they soon suffered casualties. However, the Blood Mist shinobis were indeed very fierce. 5 of them died, but they managed to kill 6 of them looting squad, and the remaining 3 were wounded, but extremely brave. The Jonin enemy leader stood in front of them and sent the others to deal with Kimimru. More than a dozen ninjas gathered around. Since Kimimru has just killed 2 of them, naturally, they didn't have the slightest intention of rushing forward. Facing the siege of more than 10 people, Kimimru finally started to look struggling. After all, he was only 6 years old at the time. Seeing this on the side, Haku quickly came to help, and the 2 of them worked together to fight against the enemies. Although they couldn't kill any of them, they managed to deal some damage, and several enemies got injured, which has shocked all the ninjas present. Such a talent, the 2 little demons must not stay alive. This looting squad Shinobis didn't care if they were just kids, they were gonna kill them to survive, but Haku and Kimimru grew fast during this battle. And because of the transformation of the Sage mode, they gained a sudden increase in power. Gradually the battle was deadlocked. At that moment, a sudden gust of wind swept across the sea, and under this stormy weather, a monstrous wave got set off, nearly 100 meters high. It looked like it's gonna sink the world, rolling toward the ship. Seeing this scene, the horrified civilians on the ship got even more scared. Who can blame them when even the Shinobis at that moment got startled? No one has thought that this storm could form such a huge wave. Although it's not ninjutsu, and it doesn't contain chakra, such a huge momentum, even an A-class ninjutsu won't stop it. The looting ninjas who were battling with Haku and Kimimru couldn't help but gasp after noticing that raging wave. It was clear that this ship won't survive if it got hit by this enormous wave. It seems that in this case, I think it's time to retreat. I didn't expect that this mission will turn out into a mess this quickly. The looting squad gave up on the fight and fell back immediately. Facing this terrifying wave, they dived directly into the sea. After all, this wave wasn't a water release. Even with such a huge momentum, a ninja could easily avoid it. As they retreated, the ninjas sneered at Haku and Kimimru and the few Shinobis from the mist who remained on the ship. In the face of the waves, they could easily do the same and escape, but they felt responsible for the civilians inside the ship. The most effective way to stop such an attack is to use an earth release, but even then, the ship will still crush. The strength of these 2 demons is not bad, but unfortunately, no matter how strong they are, they can't block that wave. Well, it might not kill them, but it will be funny to watch. The ninjas kept mocking them, but Haku and Kimimru never looked panicked. Bravely Kimimru faced the wave that has stretched for hundreds of meters, then said, "Haku, can you block it?" "It's not possible." Haku responded weakly, looking at that monstrous wave. Even his ice release is worthless against such a seize. Hearing Haku's answer, Kimimru didn't startle, but he looked somehow sorry. No way. He won't bother his master's rest even in such a situation. He has seen Naito's godlike powers, and he knew that even this wave won't do him any harm, thus, he didn't need to worry about his safety. Still, he wasn't planning on bothering him. Suddenly, all the bones in his body retracted, then stood beside Haku, looking up at the wave. The civilians inside the ship were horrified and despaired looking at it. Facing such an enormous wave made these small humans fear what was coming next. Under normal circumstances, it's impossible to encounter such a huge wave, even with bad weather like this. This was true because this monstrous wave got formed because of the previous battle between the Mist Shinobis and the looting squad. Both sides used wind releases, and after all kinds of aftermaths, it finally caused the forming of this wave. Under the desperate gazes of countless people, the monstrous wave finally came to the forefront, and everyone knew that their end was near. At that time, Naito finally walked out of the room, wearing his pajamas, as if he didn't know what was happening outside. You did well, Kimimru, but you Haku need to be more serious. Naito didn't pay any attention to that wave and first gave his evaluation to Haku and Kimimru. During the battle, Kimimru handled the details better than Haku, but he was doing unnecessary movements, even though he was causing great pressure on the enemy. On the other hand, Haku spent most of his time defending passively. Although he was playing a supporting role, he could have done better. Praised by Naito, Kimimru didn't show a proud expression, because he knew that even if he did 10 times better, it would be nothing compared to Naito's power. On the other side, Haku looked embarrassed. Although he also helped Kimimru kill some of them, Kimimru was the one who finished all of them with his bones. Okay, that's all. He turned to look at the wave that was almost falling, then he shook his head. This wasn't the right time to continue this discussion, so he clenched his fist then lightly swung it to the void. The punch hit nothing but air, but it seemed to have bombarded an invisible mirror. Suddenly, the air burst out, and the space cracked into pieces, then spread out in all directions, covering the side of the ship. It spread again and again until it was higher by hundreds of meters. What is this? The looting ninjas, who were about to dive into the sea to avoid the waves, looked at this sudden scene and got all stunned. The Jonin leader at that moment suddenly showed an incredible look, and couldn't help but widen his eyes looking at Naito. This man. In the beginning, when he saw Naito coming out, he felt that he was a little bit familiar. Although he had not seen Naito, he heard of him a lot of times. For a moment, he couldn't know which one he was from all the elite shinobis he heard of before. But when Naito punched that void, the name came to his mind. The god of shinobi. Boom! At that moment, his mind went blank, he looked as if he got struck by thunder, and his eyes got widened to the extreme. Impossible! It turned out to be him. Why is he here? The moment he thought about it, a horrifying shock force suddenly fell, sweeping the entire front, and all the ninjas in the sea, including him, got shattered. The shock wave swept across the seal, smashing that monstrous wave. With that hit, that enormous wave collapsed with countless shocked gazes. Everyone on that ship got stunned, looking at this scene. At that moment, they didn't even know how to feel about this. Under that powerful shock wave, the violent wave of hundreds of meters stagnated for a moment, then got shattered directly. Even Haku and Kimimru, who have seen Naito's power before, couldn't watch such a scene calmly. After solving this problem, Naito yawned, then with a lazy expression, he returned to his room. Don't let anyone bother me. Yes. Naito-sama. Haku and Kimimru answer at the same time. The moment the civilians on the merchant ship saw that scene where Naito smashed the monstrous wave with his punch, made most of them guess his identity. The god of shinobi. Just these 4 words are enough to clear everything, so everyone decided to visit him in his room and pay their respect, but they got all blocked by Kimimru and Haku. Naito didn't bother to care about them, and naturally, no one dared to disturb Naito forcibly. Most of the merchants left their gifts on the door and left with admiration. Next, no more accidents were encountered. The ship sailed all the way to the land of fire, and before it stopped, Naito left taking Haku and Kimimru with him. However, the people on that ship will never forget that scene they saw for the rest of their lives, and will always admire and respect Naito, even though they didn't have the chance to see him. Konoha. The setting sun reflected on the buildings and dyed the entire village with a golden glow. At that time, a grand celebration was being held in the village. In the past few years, the Land of Fire and the Land of Lightning have opened trade paths between them, and their relationship gradually improved since then. The Cloud Village and Konoha had a peace talk a few years ago, and came to conclude an alliance treaty with Konoha, planning to further a closer relationship. Of course, this is just a superficial thing. No one knows what the Cloud's real purpose is. Is this Konoha? It's enormous, much bigger than the mist. Looking at Konoha in front of him, a surprised expression appeared on Haku's face, while Kimimru stood on the side calmly. Hearing the hustle and bustle in Konoha, Kimimru strangely said, "It's very lively." So they managed to agree on an alliance treaty. This is interesting. Naito seemed to see through the whole village, watching everything happening inside from a glance. It was getting dark, and Naito decided to take Haku and Kimimru to settle temporarily inside Konoha. Silently, he entered the village with the boys. No one knew about Naito's arrival. Sneaking through the perception enchantment around the village was like opening the door to Naito. Not to mention that Naito's shock force can easily block it. Of course, this enchantment was built by the Uzumaki clan, and Kushina has repeatedly maintained it. Although Naito didn't care about Fuinjutsu, Kushina occasionally mentioned a thing or two in front of him. Thus, just from a few words, he could basically understand how this enchantment works. Just by flying to a high point, the enchantment won't be able to detect you, and that way, he managed to sneak the boys in with him. The night fell quickly. That hustle and bustle from before gradually calmed down, and the celebration began. Almost everyone in the village participated in this celebration, but only one group didn't, the Hyuga clan, because another ceremony was also being held inside the clan, a birthday ceremony. Just when Konoha was busy celebrating, a shadow flashed over Konoha, and with the aid of the darkness, he could easily sneak it. The man, who was covering his face, seemed like he had a clear purpose. He crossed a lot of distance quickly and entered the Hyuga clan's territory. It didn't take him long to grab a little girl in a cute kimono, with a touch of mockery in his eyes. "I didn't expect it to be this easy, Hyuga clan. Ha! So much fame for nothing. This man is the ninja leader that the Cloud has sent to conclude the alliance treaty. It's challenging to get your hand on the Bakugan because the Hyuga clansmen don't leave the village, and the people who guard the main family have a seal on their forehead. Even when they die, their eyes will automatically get destroyed. It's tough to catch them, but who he was holding in his hand was the daughter of the clan's patriarch, Hinata Hyuga. At this time, Hinata was unconscious. He looked down at her then said, "Don't you worry, I won't harm you, I will only take those eyes." In the rear, the Hyuga clan. When Hinata was captured, the guards noticed quickly and rushed toward the patriarch to inform him. Patriarch. Not good. Princess Hinata got kidnapped. What? Hayashi jumped from his place and got immediately furious the moment he heard that sentence. This is Konoha and the Hyuga clan territory. How did they manage to sneak into this place and kidnap Hinata without anyone noticing? Without hesitation, Hayashi rushed out, opened his eyes, and saw that man rushing into Konoha. There were already a few shinobis chasing him down, but they were obviously not an opponent for him, and they got easily defeated by him. Noticing how Hinata was unconscious, Hayashi suddenly burst out with anger, and without any hesitation, he rushed out chasing that man. The man found it difficult to get rid of the Hyuga clansmen with their Bakugan eyes. "Forget it, I will just take these eyes." He looked at Hinata with an evil and cruel expression, then suddenly stretched out his fingers toward her closed eyes. Suddenly, something weird happened. Hinata vanished. She disappeared from thin air as if she wasn't there in the first place. What? The shinobi didn't know how to respond. He even wondered if he was dreaming. Whoosh! Suddenly, he felt a weird chill in his spine and got extremely terrified. Hinata disappeared suddenly, and no matter how hard the cloud shinobi thought, he couldn't figure out how did that happened. Thus, he didn't dare to even think about it, and fled desperately, with evident fear in his eyes. The fact that someone has managed to take that little girl from his hand without him even noticing is enough for him to know that this guy's strength should absolutely be terrifying. Such a person can never be a ninja from the Hyuga clan. Who is he? Suddenly, the shinobi stopped moving. At that moment, he knew who has taken Hinata from his hands. His forehead got filled with cold sweat, and with endless fear in his eyes, he thought, it turned out to be him. Why is he in Konoha? The shinobi was trembling, and he started to feel his body becoming stiff. Even if he wanted to take fall back, he couldn't, his body wouldn't let him. He felt as if there was a terrible pressure, pressing his body, making him almost paralyzed. Under this massive pressure, he couldn't even lift a finger, let alone fall back. At this moment, Naito was standing in front of him, calmly on a roof. But he wasn't looking at him, instead, he was smiling at the little girl he was holding in his arms. Her short hair was a bit messy, and her eyes were closed, her cheeks had a rosy touch on them, which made them look cute. She was trembling out of cold. She was only wearing pajamas. Is this Hinata? She's a little bit cuter than expected. Whoosh! At that time, Hayashi was rushing in the streets, with his Bakugan wide open. However, he couldn't catch the second where Naito took Hinata from that shinobi's hands. Hayashi was worthy of being the head clan of the Hyuga. No matter how hard the shock was, he could still remain calm for the entire time. After coming to the street, Hayashi didn't look at the shinobi, who kidnapped Hinata, but instead, he looked up at Naito, with evident respect. Naito-sama. He didn't know why Naito came to Konoha, and couldn't understand why he helped his daughter Hinata, but he did, and this was the most important thing. Moreover, even if Naito didn't, he was the god of shinobi, and as the head clan of the Hyuga, he must pay his respect to him. It's kind of surprising how careless the Hyuga clan can be. Naito, who was holding Hinata in his hands, looked down at Hayashi, then stepped down from the roof. Naito stepped on the void, then walked down, step by step, as if he was taking an invisible staircase, then stood in front of Hayashi. This scene has also let Hayashi fully confirm that it was really him. I'm truly sorry, Naito-sama. Thank you for saving my little girl. The sorrow was evident on Hayashi's face. Indeed, such an incident will be considered a disgrace for the entire Hyuga clan. Looking at him, Naito only smiled, which made Hayashi even more confused. He kept calm outside, but deep inside his heart, he was worried. He couldn't find an answer to his previous question, why did he save Hinata? Is he also interested in the Bakuganais? But this doesn't make sense at all. With Naito's power, the Bakuganais are nothing to him. Actually, the entire clan is nothing. Naito has already suppressed the entire shinobi world. He is the god of shinobi. Is this your daughter? What's her name? Hinata. Hayashi carefully answered Naito's question. At that moment, Hayashi was more concerned about what Naito wanted to do. That was the important thing. After all, he saved his daughter. It's clear he doesn't want to harm them or anything. In any case, he must not offend Naito. At the same time, Hayashi was keeping an eye on the shinobi, who kidnapped Hinata. But this was only making the situation even worse for Hayashi. The guy looked stunned, trembling with fear. Still, he was standing there like a nail, unable to move, as if he was bound by some kind of a force, which made Hayashi feel very scared. Frightened to the point that he was feeling as if his body was sinking. But what was below him is hard ground. Why is he feeling this way? Suddenly Hayashi heard the sounds of breaking bones. Naito was holding Hinata, and he didn't do anything special actions, but there was no fourth person here. The shinobi looked extremely terrified. He never expected that kidnapping a girl from the Hyuga clan would provoke the god of shinobi. It's an unbelievable thing. How could the Hyuga clan be related to you, Naito? He had an extreme feeling of regret. He wanted to ask Naito for mercy, but he couldn't even make a sound. Suddenly a touch of despair flashed in his eyes. Crack! Finally, every single bone in the shinobi's body got broken and fell on the ground with the blood splashing all over the place, yet he couldn't even emit a scream at the end. And Naito never looked at him from beginning to end. Well, take Hinata away, she's still young, we don't want her to be scared. Naito looked at Hayashi, handed him Hinata, then Hayashi subconsciously reached out to take her over, and at the same time, kept looking at him with a look of surprise. It seems that Naito really cares about Hinata, which was merely weird. Naito didn't wait for Hayashi to figure out the situation and suddenly disappeared. The former didn't even notice how Naito has left. He looked as if he has vanished out of thin air. At that moment, Hayashi couldn't help but show a touch of awe. However, it just happened that Hinata has also started her practice. If Naito really cares about her, he wouldn't mind taking her as his disciple. Then they will be directly leaning on a big tree, and the kind of the tall one too. However, after thinking about it, Hayashi couldn't help but laugh. He felt like maybe he was just overthinking. Although Hinata was his daughter, the princess of the Hyuga clan, her identity was completely worthless in front of Naito. Even the entire clan is not much in front of him. Could he even know about her? Not to mention that the moment Naito disappears, he would never be able to find him again, and even if he does, he wasn't sure that Naito would accept her. It's estimated that Naito just happened to be in Konoha, and saw Hinata being kidnapped, and just saved her. In any case, he was really grateful that Naito saves his daughter. Konoha, in a motel room, Kimimuru and Haku sat there, waiting quietly. After a while, the door got gently pushed open, and Naito came in, closing it behind him, then walked aside and sat down. "Naito-sama, you're back." "Yes." Naito nodded, took the cup of tea on the table, then took a sip, then his expression changed as if he was thinking about something. Haku and Kimimuru didn't dare to disturb him and kept sitting there quietly. Naito groaned for a while before returning to his senses, then suddenly smiled and said, "Since I've already done it, I will help until the end. There's no reason to leave behind unfinished work." Haku looked at Kimimuru, and the latter shrugged. Naito was obviously talking to himself. It was already morning, but Konoha wasn't as calm as always, with three parties making a lot of noise. On one side, the Cloud Shinobi, each one of them looked aggressive and terrifying. On the other side, Konoha Shinobi was led by Sarutobi, who had a low expression on his face. The last party was formed by the Hyuga clan, and the head of the clan himself, Hayashi Hyuga, was leading them. At this time, Hinata was hiding weakly behind Hayashi. The aggression from both sides made her feel scared. Hinata's behavior and appearance have made a lot of the elders from the Hyuga clan frown, This is not how a leader should look. How would they inherit the clan to such a person in the future? However, Hinata was still young, only 3 years old, and may gradually become better in the future. We don't care, Konoha must give us compensation immediately. The Cloud's leader spoke sharply. If it was any other time, Sarutobi would have already taught him a lesson, but this time, he could only frown. He took a glance at Hayashi, then Sarutobi shouted, "What do you want? Hand over the killer." The leader sneered, saying, "Our comrade died here on your lands, but you still asking us this? Of course, we want the murdered. If you don't respond to our demands, then the Cloud Village won't hesitate to attack Konoha, war will break out." Sarutobi kept listening, but when he heard the word war, he couldn't help but frown. This matter should be handled with caution. Although Konoha wasn't afraid of the Cloud, war should always be avoided. After successive deaths such as Danza, Sakumo, and Orochimaru's defection, Konoha got weakened too much, and it will be challenging to fight against them. It is much likely that the battle between them will also be the fuel for the Fourth World War. Although Sarutobi is not afraid to play with the Cloud, he can't just bet on war, because he cannot afford to lose the gamble. After all, the Cloud Shinobi died in Konoha. No matter what his purpose was, the Cloud will never acknowledge it, and they will focus on the point that he got killed in Konoha. Sarutobi but think seriously about answering their demands. The matter is very clear. The Cloud Shinobi wanted to get his hands on the Byakugan and got killed by the Hyuga. Since the issue lies with the Hyuga clan, let them then surrender a murderer. This way, the matter will be resolved, and he will be able to weaken the strength of the Hyuga clan. This is like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Thinking of this, Sarutobi turned to look at Hayashi and said, "Hayashi, there's no other way, we must respond to their demands. You should surrender yourself." After Konoha's Shinobi arrived, only Hayashi was standing there with Hinata on the field. It's not difficult to speculate that he was the one who killed that Shinobi to save his daughter. The Cloud Ninja came quickly and recovered the body of that Shinobi. They failed to figure out the specific reason for his death, but every bone in his body was broken. It looked like he was attacked by a soft hand technique user. In this case, there was no room for doubt. "Someone else has done it, I didn't kill him," Hayashi shouted with a firm expression. "Nonsense. It's clear that you're the one who killed our leader." The Cloud Ninjas screamed at Hayashi. Hinata behind him looked frightened, while she was grabbing her father's clothes tightly. Hayashi didn't have time to comfort her, and stared at the Cloud Shinobi coldly, saying, "It's not me who killed him. How many times do I need to repeat myself, so you could understand? If I had killed that man who wanted to cause pain to my family, I would have already admitted it. But you said someone else has killed him." "Yes, point it out for us then." The Cloud Ninjas have already foreseen such a situation long ago. They knew that the relationship between Konoha and the major clans was very poor. They knew that Sarutobi will force the Hyuga to choose one of their clansmen. Of course, the latter wouldn't have wasted such an opportunity to weaken the Hyuga. "Hayashi. Only you and Hinata were present at the time. You can't say that your daughter has killed him." Sarutobi stared at Hayashi as his attitude became extremely aggressive. The Cloud Shinobi followed and stared at him, and for a second, the momentum seemed to get heavier. If he was an ordinary person, he would have collapsed from such a momentum, but Hayashi was the head of the Hyuga clan, and he had a heart of a steel. "Even if you're the head clan of the Hyuga, you must pay with your life for killing our leader." You can't just say that this little girl has killed him. The shinobi shouted at Hayashi. I said I didn't kill him. Hayashi replied firmly again. He didn't know what to say else. Naito has saved his daughter, and he wouldn't just put the blame on him, although he knew that no one would be stupid enough to offend him, that if they would even believe him. What should he do, continue on resisting, or say it was Naito? The shinobi stared at him, then took out his weapon. If it's not you, then who killed him? You must give us an explanation. Who dared to kill our leader? Facing the fears of the Cloud Shinobi, Hinata got startled, and hid behind her father, who was watching these men walking toward him step by step. Hinata grabbed her father's hand tightly, while she looked extremely frightened, fearing that they will kill him because of her. At that moment, a hand suddenly patted her little head, as if it to calm her. But this wasn't Hayashi's hand, it came from behind her. Hinata froze for a moment, then couldn't help but turn around to see someone who she didn't know. His face was calm and safe, which made her heart somehow get settled a little. Don't be afraid. Naito smiled at Hinata slightly, then walked past her to the forefront, and glanced at the Cloud Shinobi. Silence. It was at the moment when Naito appeared, all the actions and expressions of everyone got suddenly stagnant. The atmosphere in the air was suddenly disappointed by Naito's sudden appearance. Everyone became so quiet then. Looking at Naito, who finally showed up, Hayashi let a sigh of relief. What he was worried about is that Naito would have already left Konoha. Otherwise, as long as Naito is in Konoha, he will definitely show up since he was the one who killed that guy. Who is this guy? Hinata also felt the change in the atmosphere. Watching Naito walking from her side to the front, she couldn't help but whisper to her father, with a surprised expression on her face. Hinata, don't be rude. Hayashi said solemnly, he's the man who saved you last night. Upon hearing that, Hinata got more surprised. Looking at Naito's back, her cheeks got covered with a lovely flush. She knew that a guy has saved her last night, and from the respectful tone of her father, she thought that it should be a very old elder, but she didn't expect him to be so young, even younger than her father. Hinata was curious, why her father would be so respectful in front of a young man like Naito. Under her curious gaze, Naito was already in the center of the field. Everyone looked confused. It was an incredible thing for the god of Shinobi, Naito, to appear so suddenly in front of them, yet no one doubted Naito's identity. On such an occasion, who would dare to transform into his look and come out to make a joke? Moreover, the people who are present are all ninjas. Even if they are not perceptual ones, they can easily feel the vast and unreachable terror power coming out of Naito. Naito didn't reveal his momentum, even his eyes didn't look sharp, but with just taking a few steps, the Cloud Shinobi's momentum got dissipated. Naito smiled at them, then said with a light tone, that it seemed to emit in everyone's ears. I've heard that you're looking for the one who killed your comrade. The Cloud Shinboy didn't dare to answer, or maybe they didn't know how to respond. They simply felt that Naito's appearance was like pouring cold water on their body, making them tremble and unable to react for a moment. Although he didn't show the slightest killing intent, his expression only made all of them feel shocked. The Cloud Party was present here in order to make an alliance treaty with Konoha. The lowest ranked ninja between them would be at least an elite Chunin, and the majority of them were Jonin. These people's level was more than enough to have a general understanding of how strong the god of Shinobi should be. Some of these people have even encountered Naito in the Third Shinobi World War and saw the shocking scene where Naito suppressed the Nibi, which made them feel chills on the back of their neck when they saw Naito this time. But this was unbelievable. Why would the Hyuga clan have such a strong relationship with Naito? Why would he step up to help them? Did they make him his leader? This is just incredible. The entire world would love to have such a relationship with Naito. Hell, the major villagers would kill for such a relationship, let alone a single clan. The leading shinobi looked extremely terrified. The embarrassment looked evident in his eyes, when he said, "Well, we were just looking for a guy who killed our leader." "No need to, I'm the one who killed your leader." Naito didn't even raise his eyelids, then continued faintly, "So, what are you going to do about it?" Hearing this sentence made all the people at the field feel stunned. Even Sarutobi looked somewhat surprised. It was more like, "I'm the one who killed it, and you can't do anything about it." Even someone like Sarutobi wouldn't be able to say such a thing. The Cloud Shinobi would have attacked immediately, and the war between the Cloud and Konoha would have broken out after that. But the person who said this sentence was Naito, and they won't pull out such a move in front of him. If they dare to provoke him, he would just crush them along with their village, and at most, the Cloud village will end up apologizing to him. "What's wrong? Didn't you say that the murderer should pay for the death of your leaders with his own life?" Naito's tone had a touch of ridicule and contempt in it. It was evident that these guys were looking for the Bakuganais from the beginning. But leaving all of that behind, he was really interested in what the Cloud Shinobi will do after they said they're gonna take the murderer's life. The leading Shinobi was sweating a lot. Whether Naito was the one who killed their leader, or the head clan of the Hyuga, it was evident that he needed to forget about this whole situation and leave for once. Originally, Sarutobi wanted to use this opportunity to weaken the Hyuga clan, but he didn't expect the situation to turn this way around. Suddenly an idea flashed in the Cloud Shinobi's head, and after he took a deep breath, he immediately said, "Yes, I just found out the evidence that our leader has betrayed our village with his actions. Thank you, Naito-sama, for bringing that traitor to justice." "Yes, that's it." After he said that, he looked at his fellow companions, and all of them squeezed out an ugly smile. Looking at their funny expressions, the Hyuga clansmen and Konoha Shinobi laughed hard, and even Hayashi's expression looked a bit unnatural at that moment. At the same time, including Sarutobi, everyone shared one feeling in their hearts, an unlimited admiration for the god of Shinobi, Naito. What a legend! They wouldn't show such an expression even to Sarutobi in his prime time. These Shinobi were elites, they wouldn't be afraid of death. Even before coming to Konoha, these men have already been psychologically prepared to die. However, as ninjas, if they were going to die, they felt like they would need to die meaningfully. Meaningless death is what they feared. Dying by slap will be the most disgraceful, meaningless death ever. Their names wouldn't even be engraved on a monument. What would they put there? Died bravely from a slap. Then what? Causing their entire village to get hit by the range of the god. They will just end up being regarded as a sinner. From the beginning to the end, Naito didn't attack or even show his killing intent. Only a few words made the Cloud Shinobis run away. Everyone feared Naito. As a result, none of them would have dared to provoke him. They were initially very energetic and ready to face everyone, but when they saw Naito, they couldn't help but back off. Even though they have planned for this from the start. Naito was too lazy to take the shot on these Shinobi and kill them all. Also, he didn't want to scare little Hinata. Sarutobi watched the Cloud Shinobi awkwardly, leaving with their tails between their legs. He couldn't figure out the kind of the relationship that the Hyuga has established with Naito. It seems now that it will be more difficult to weaken them. Sarutobi wanted to walk over toward Naito and say hello, but Hayashi beat him and rushed toward him quickly. "Thank you, Naito-sama, for your help." "It's okay, it was me who killed him after all." Naito glanced at Hayashi, then shook his head and turned away. Hayashi originally wanted to invite Naito to his house, so he could affirm Naito's relationship with the Hyuga clan, but Naito had not given him the opportunity to do so and disappeared directly. Hinata stood next to Hayashi, watching Naito's departure, and a touch of admiration appeared in her cute grey eyes. Although she was only 3 years old, she could understand that Naito was the one who helped them out of the crisis just now, and with just a few words, these shinobi couldn't help but leave. Such a thing even her father couldn't do. In Hinata's eyes, of course, her father was strong, but now she understands that there's someone who's even stronger, which is you, Naito. Looking at him leaving, Hayashi shook his head in disappointment. After all, he couldn't get closer to Naito. Konoha. Near the edge of the villager, within the woods. A battle was taking place here. Ding ding dong. The sound of this metallic symphony emitted. There was a teenager who was activating his Sharingan, constantly clashing his kunai with another young man, who had a spear bone in his hand. This bone blade in his hand was originally his arm bone that he took out. Kimimro's expression was solemn and continually crying out loud with every hit. Suddenly, he flipped in the air and attacked the young man with the bones that suddenly burst out of his body. The young man, who was activating his Sharingan, was about 7 or 8 years old, and he was Uchiha Itakai. Ding ding dong. Facing Kimimro's storm-like attack, Uchiha Itakai didn't get surprised. Instead, he reacted quickly, jumping and waving, blocking all the attacks and falling back at the same time. 10-finger drilling bullets. Kimimro saw Itakai retreating, and didn't hesitate to take this chance, and attack him with his bone bullets. Itakai's expression was as calm as water. Using the Sharingan observation ability, he could clearly see the trajectory of every flying bullet, then flipped in the air, avoiding them all. Then suddenly, from the other side, countless ice needles rushed toward him. Although it wasn't as powerful as the bone bullets, that attack range was huge. Itakai seemed to have a touch of surprise on his face, and his body suddenly got stabbed by those ice needles. Then out of nowhere, his body turned into a piece of wood. This guy. Kimimro walked to Haku's side and looked around with great vigilance. Uchiha Itakai was the strongest enemy they have ever encountered. He has almost the most perfect chakra control. In terms of power, Itakai was still a step behind the Jonin level, and the amount of his chakra didn't even reach the standards yet. However, he was almost close to reaching the Jonin level, and he was far more troublesome than all the Chunin that Kimimro has fought against before. If Terumi Mai suppressed Kimimro by her various bloodline limit technique, then Uchiha Itakai did by only opening his Sharingan and observing all of his moves. Kaiten, Fireball. The next moment, Itakai suddenly flashed from the side of Kimimro and Haku, and with one hand sign, he fired a huge fireball at them. Haku has been ready for that a long time ago. When the fireball was released, he also used an ice wall at the same time, and blocked the fireball from reaching them. The flames gradually dissipated, then Haku and Kimimro both looked at Uchiha Itakai solemnly. However, compared to what they both felt, Itakai was the more surprised one. Among the kid on his age, almost no one could stand against him for this long. After he graduated early, his strength was already comparable to Special Jonin. But now he met 2 younger children, even smaller than him, and they managed to grab a tie. How can this not surprise him? Where did these guys come from? Are they scouts who disguise in children's appearances to sneak into the village? But Uchiha Itachi calmed down his heart with a deep breath, then holding his kunai, he rushed at Kimimaro and Haku again. Kimimaro greeted him without fear, but just after the confrontation, Itachi in front of him suddenly turned into white smoke and disappeared. Clone technique. Kimimaro's eyes flickered, then immediately looked around to find Itachi's location, but almost immediately, Itachi suddenly rushed out from behind a tree, catching Haku. Beware! When Kimimaro saw that Haku was in danger, he directly fired a bone bullet out of his hand, but what he didn't expect that Itachi was just another clone. It wasn't a shadow clone, it's just a normal one, but Itachi used it better than any ninja that Kimimaro has ever encountered. Whoosh! The next moment, Itachi appeared again, rushing directly toward Kimimaro. Without breaking any sweat, he quickly reached Kimimaro's back. Kimimaro didn't know what's coming next, but he didn't have any fear. He quickly created a layer of bones under his skin and prepared to block Itachi's attack, and at the same time, he grew a bone from his back to counter-attack him. Holding the kunai, Itachi rushed toward Kimimaro. He knew that the latter wouldn't have the time to avoid his attack. However, Itachi suddenly stopped before reaching him. To be precise, he was stopped by someone who grabbed him by the hand. Who? No matter how reluctantly calm he looked, he was extremely horrified inside. He was using his Sharingan the entire time. How could someone suddenly appear in front of him without him noticing it? His speed should be incredible. Itachi knew that his Sharingan, in the worst case, would at least capture the after image of the movement. Even the fastest shinobis in Konoha wouldn't fool his eyes. However, when Itachi saw the person who grabbed him, he immediately gave on resistance and revealed a respectful expression. HolyOniiSama. When he saw Itachi once when he was a child, he didn't know much about him. After that incident, he collected various information, and his knowledge can be said to have grown much, especially about the legend of Naruto. He extremely admired him. It seems to be clear now, in addition to space-time ninjutsu, there's also the god of shinobi, Naruto, whom the Sharingan can't see his movements. Naruto let go of Itachi's hand and turned to look at Kimimaro and Haku. When the two saw Naruto, they immediately stopped moving. The bones on Kimimaro's body got retracted, and the ice on the earth melted, then they greeted Naruto. HolyOniiSama. When Itachi saw that, he got stunned. Naruto glanced with a touch of strangeness in his eyes at the two of them, saying, "Why on earth are the two of you fighting him?" "Sorry, HolyOniiSama, I thought they were scouts from another village." Itachi, who was wearing Konoha's guard uniform, bowed down toward Naruto. After he graduated, he couldn't join any team because he graduated very early. In addition, he was the eldest son of the Uchiha current patriarch, thus, he joined the Konoha police force. While he was bowing toward Naruto, his eyes returned to normal, but before he does that, Itachi couldn't hold back the curiosity in his heart. Using his Sharingan, he took a look at Naruto's body. It was this simple glance that shocked the boy. What a scene! Before Itachi's eyes, he saw something that he has never seen since he first awakened his Sharingan. Under the perception of the Sharingan, Naruto's body looked like an endless abyss or a vast sky. In that starry sky, there were 6 dazzling stars, and in each one of them, a horrible flowing of chakra. It was like a vast sea brewing. You don't need to add them all up, just one of the 6 is far more powerful than his father's chakra, who has been observed before by Itachi, and even more than the 3rd Hokage. It's simply incredible. Itachi used this bow-down gesture to cover the shock in his eyes, and at the same time, he couldn't help but murmur, it seems that the legends are true. The power of HolyOniiSama is godlike. Unreachable. Itachi thought that he was covering up well for himself, but in fact, all his action, even that little glance that he took with his Sharingan, got all captured in Naito's perception. Itachi was really different than other children. If he didn't know him well, he would have doubted that this young body contains another soul. Of course, even if Itachi is a genius, he is not much for Naito, but he seems to be more than enough for Kimimru and Haku. After applying the first stage of the Sage Mode transformation, coupled with the two's unique bloodline limits, Kimimru and Haku became almost invincible to children of the same age. Itachi was slightly older than them, but he was already stronger. Naito thought for a while, but he didn't say anything, he just smiled, and left. Kimimru, Haku, let's go. Yes, sir. Kimimru nodded, then followed Naito, but he couldn't help but look back at Itachi. At that moment, Itachi was finally back to being himself and woke up from his shock. Looking at this young man, who wasn't that older than him but made him feel a lot of pressure, Kimimru couldn't help but feel his heart on fire. What's your name? Uchiha Itachi. Okay, I'll remember it, and I hope we complete this one someday. After that, Kimimru followed Naito and disappeared into the woods. Looking at Kimimru and Haku leaving, Itachi stood there, feeling a little bit envious that these two could follow Naito and get his guidance. Kimimru. Ha! Shortly after Naito took Kimimru away, a bunch of weird puppets appeared in Konoha. They seemed to be observing the village. More accurately, they were monitoring the Hyuga clan. These puppets appeared out of thin air, even Naito didn't notice them before they showed up. 1 second ago they didn't exist, as if they have used space ninjutsu. At this moment, in the remote horizon, moon. This moon was made by the sixth path Otsutsuki Hagoromo and his younger brother Homura. After sealing Otsutsuki Kaguya, the Sage of Six Paths sought the true meaning of peace in ninja world and created ninjutsu. Then later, people evolved it to ninjutsu, while Otsutsuki Homura guarded the moon and his descendant after him, who lived on it for generations. Moreover, their bloodline was extremely pure. Is that the strongest ninja in the world? Is he created by the Sage of Sixth Paths? He almost caught me after just a little observation. He's terrifying. Why does he have such horrifying power? The middle-aged man in a strange white robe, with a strange tomo in his eyes, looked confused, saying, "This Naito seems to have a special connection with the Sage of Sixth Paths, as well as our ancestor." Just as the middle-aged man was groaning, a young boy with short silver hair suddenly came in. "Father, you're invited to the meeting." This young man was Tonari Otsutsuki, and the middle-aged man was his father, and he's a member of the Otsutsuki clan. The descendants of Homura on the moon have a similar system to the Hyuga clan in the Shinobi world. The world that has got created by the Sage of the Six Paths has failed. So far, there have been too many wars. They even managed to steal the Jidomazo from us. It's all over. Touching Tonari's hair, his father stared coldly, saying, "The people in the Hyuga clan are stubborn, it's time to make an end to it. This failure world should be completely destroyed, and then recreated. As for Naito, no matter how strong he is, facing the Tensogun, he's nothing." Rain Village. Naito took the two kids back to the rain. After saying hello to Tsunade, and asking Kanan to take care of Kimimru and Haku, Naito returned home. This is the legendary Rinnegan eyes are really powerful. Kushina was holding the glass bottle in her hand, which contained liquid, and in that liquid was the Rinnegan obtained from Nagato. Under the keen perception of the Kyuubi's chakra, Kushina could perceive the terrifying power of these eyes. Compared to her, Kurama inside her had an even stronger relationship with these eyes, and he could instantly recognize them. The eyes of the old six. Kurama felt the power of the Rinnegan, and a strange color flashed in his eyes while thinking about the Sage of the Sixth Paths. Afterward, he felt kind of jealous, saying, "I really don't believe that guy could awake these eyes." Looking at these eyes, Kushina couldn't help but think about Nagato. Although he wanted to kill her and capture Kurama, Nagato was also a member of the Uzumaki clan like her. Grandma Mito, my, Nagato. It seems that the Uzumaki clan will really disappear from the world in the end. That's not necessarily true. Naito, who was sitting next to her, smiled, saying, "When the Uzumaki clan got attacked, a lot of people escape. Nagato wasn't the only one, but..." Having said that, Naito grinned then said, "And as long as you want, with me, you can always rebuild the Uzumaki clan." Kushina rolled her eyes. Of course, she knew what Naito meant, but she ignored him completely and leaned on his chest, then continued looking at the Rinnegan. The Rinnegan floated quietly in the bottle, and Kushina kept staring at them in a moment of complete absence as if she was immersing in it. After a while, Kushina got back to her sense again, and turned to look at Naito, then said softly, "So what are you going to do about them?" "The Rinnegan." Naito drew her closer, then said, "Nothing for now." Naito didn't particularly care about the Rinnegan, mainly because the soul is now in the process of transformation. And he estimated that when he opens the seventh gate, he will directly step into the sixth path level, without the need to rely on the Juubi's power. The Rinnegan won't be particularly helpful to Naito, and the two weren't his own eyes in the first place, and transplantation will always have disadvantages. The only reason he was keeping them is as a second choice. If Kushina somehow failed to step into the sixth path level in the future, he will then use these eyes along the Kyuubi's chakra to help her. After all, the person that Naito cared about the most is Kushina. Even with the Sage Mode transformation, her body will eventually die. Kushina learned a lot of secrets from Naito, and she could roughly guess why Naito brought back these eyes with him, so he couldn't help but smile. She gently grasped Naito's hand and placed it on her heart, and with tears in her eyes, she smiled, then whispered softly, "You know that there's no need for you to be so considerable, everything will be fine, Naito." Naito smiled and rubbed her little head, then gently wrapped his arms around her. Naito didn't say anything back to Kushina, but his eyes seemed extremely sharp. All that he truly desired is to go to the end of the world and stay with her forever. For this reason, no matter who stands in his way, he will overcome him to see the end of that road. Kushina felt his body and noticed that there was a change in his breath. She couldn't help but feel surprised at that moment, and hurriedly looked at him, to find that he had already closed his eyes. Without disturbing him, Kushina showed a gentle smile, then turned slightly away, leaving him alone in the room. At this time, Naito seemed to be merged into the world. The way he was breathing seemed special. When the body is full of natural energy, the Sage Mode can help the body communicate with endless natural energy in the world. However, what Naito was experiencing wasn't that simple this time. Naito was feeling a sense of detachment in his soul, even though his body was fully integrated with the world. This was something above the world, above nature. When the Sage Mode reaches the final stage, it will contain the properties of water, fire, earth, and thunder, plus the attributes of yin and yang, you will finally obtain the power of the sixth path, which is the sixth path mode. Strictly speaking, the sage mode can be divided into 3 stages. The first is the ordinary one, the second is the perfect sage mode, and the third is the sixth path senjutsu, which is the sixth path mode. After a long transformation, Naito's soul has finally broken into the final stage. In Naito's perception, his soul extended infinitely, it felt as if it has detached from his body, it felt as if it has reached the edge of the world. On the edge of the world, it seems there was a thin layer stopping Naito from reaching the front, but he felt that he can pierce it just by reaching out with his hand. What is this thing? Naito looked at that thin layer, and couldn't help but poke it gently. Although it looks fragile, that layer had an extreme resistance. Naito barely touched it before it gently pushed his fingers back. However, when he did, Naito finally understood what it exactly was. Naito was inside the spiritual world, and this layer was the edge of the void. The moment he understood that, Naito knew what he needed to do next. If I break it, I will go out, and reach beyond the perfection, I will finally put my foot into 6 paths powers. Looking at the barrier in the spiritual world, Naito's heart flashed with a bright light. This spiritual world was like an eggshell. Inside it, Naito's soul got tempered and strengthened. But since Naito's soul was finally metamorphosed, it needed to get out of this shell. This was like an ultimate leap toward perfection. With the help of Indra and Asura's chakra, or by awakening the Rinnegan, this so-called barrier could be easily torn apart. Even by becoming the Juubi's Jinchuriki, the soul could take this leap directly. Becoming a sage of the 6 paths cannot be achieved only by walking through one road. But the one that Naito has taken was obviously a hell of a ride. Naito was able to feel the restraint of the spiritual space on him, but with a sharp look on his face, he stretched his hands out, trying to resist it and tear the barrier apart. With every small tear on that barrier, an endless force was gathering together and blessing Naito's body, breaking away from the spiritual world's barrier. Whoosh! The barrier of the soul got suddenly torn apart. The moment this gap appeared, it spread directly to the surroundings, and in the blink of an eye, it was densely spreading over the entire spiritual world. It didn't take long before everything fell apart. When the soul space got completely disintegrated, it shrank inward, turning into pure and incomparable energy, then got poured into Naito's body, and finally blended entirely with him. It looked like a second, but it felt like endless time has passed. Naito stood there quietly. After the last ray of energy got merged, Naito finally felt something he couldn't perceive before. After breaking the spiritual world, his soul finally stepped into the 6 paths level, and Naito's consciousness appeared in a strange realm. It was a vast world, without earth, or a sky, a world with margins, and it seemed that there was nothing but a vast white. There's nothing like the spiritual world concept, and the distance itself didn't exist here. To be precise, here was the gap between the afterlife realm and the shinobi world. I didn't expect that you could come this far. A voice suddenly came from behind Naito. When the latter turned around, he saw the soul of an old man, wearing a robe with 6 tomo on it. He had a pair of the Rinnegan eyes and sat cross-legged in the air. The moment he saw him, Naito could recognize his identity. There was no doubt about it, the man in front of him was the sage of the 6 paths. In fact, Naito could sense his will the moment he stepped into this realm. Hagoromo Otsutsuki. The 6 paths looked at Naito, with a touch of surprise in his eyes, but seemed more like curiosity. Naito could feel the vast power of the 6 paths, but in essence, he was no different from him. Although this was the founder of the ninjutsu himself, the moment Naito stepped into this realm, his soul became in the state of the Six Paths level. With one thought, Naito could open the seventh gate in his body, and complete the transformation of the Sage of the Six Paths. From Naito, the Six Paths is no longer that kind of hard-to-reach existence, he's already standing in an equal position to him. Staring at him, Naito said with doubt, "Have you been watching?" "I've been here all the time, watching the changes in the Shinobi world. I've never thought you would really make it here." Hagoromo gently swung his scepter towards the white space below, and a picture of the Shinobi realm suddenly appeared on the ground. Sitting there, as if he was sitting on the clouds, he was overlooking the entire world, and could almost see every corner of it. Even Naito could hardly do this. Hagoromo is indeed the closest to Kaguya, in other words, the closest to the existence of a god. So it's just like this. Naito looked down at the image that the Six Paths had created, and a flash of inexplicable light appeared in his eyes. Although he knew all the plots in the original, Naito still felt that there were a lot of things that need answers, such as, how didn't Hagoromo know about Black Zetsu's existence, and if he did, why didn't he stop him, and so on. With his strength, the Six Paths can easily interfere in the Shinobi world. He can wipe out the existence of Black Zetsu, and prevent Madara from awakening the Rinnegan, or even achieving his final form. But Hagoromo didn't do anything. He kept always watching, as a spectator, quietly keeping an eye on the development of the world. Does the Sage of the Six Paths really seek peace for the Shinobi world? It's meaningless to interfere with the world operate. My mother, Kaguya, used all of her strength to stop all the wars, but her methods got proven to be wrong later. Ninja that I've created was also a failure. People developed it for ninjutsu, which completely exceeded my original intention. Now I can only hope to see the successors of Indra and Asura, and wait for the new answers. However, your unexpected appearance showed me that maybe there are different answers. Hagoromo looked at the Shinobi realm below with some complexities. He tried to achieve it according to his own thoughts and idea, but failed to guide the world to peace, so he left those thoughts to his sons, Indra and Ashura, and no longer interfered with Shinobi world and became a spectator. Listening to the Six Paths words, and combined with what Naito has already known, he began to slightly understand his thoughts. The Six Paths realm can be said to be second only to Hagoromo himself. Since his birth, it has been thousands of years, and sure he had witnessed too many things. For a man, who's considered to be a god, Hagoromo had nothing particularly to pursue, he had no selfish goal. The only thing he wanted is that people can understand each other, so the world can move towards peace. This purpose is exactly the same as the one that Hashirama, Madara, and even Nagato had. Hagoromo has witnessed Kaguya's era, so he believes that when power is concentrated around one person, his soul will get corrupted, and he will become a slave to power, and the world will also become a place full of fear. For that reason, Hagoromo and his brother Homura sealed Kaguya together and chose another path, which was to give power to others. The Sage of the Six Paths created ninja by changing the form of chakra, so that it could be owned by everyone, and connected to each other, in order to reach a level where everyone could understand each other. However, the creation of the ninja failed with the appearance of the ninjutsu. The ninja connected all the chakra in the world, and the ninjutsu broke that connection, turning chakra into something unique in itself. The Six Paths witnessed the period where Kaguya interfered with how the world operated and saw the results. Thus, he decided to respect how the world worked and didn't interfere with its development, and even he himself followed the principles of life, death, and illness. Of course, death was just a form to him. After aging and dying, Hagoromo stayed in this realm, observing the world and its action, and when he knew about Black Zetsu's existence, he chose not to interfere. Even when Black Zetsu was clearly trying to revive Kaguya, he kept just watching. The Six Paths didn't interfere with Black Zetsu, so it was reasonable not to interfere with what Naito was doing too. For him, the world was the important thing, not individuals. But this didn't ease his shock when he saw Naito walking into this realm. The latter didn't rely on Indra and Ashura's chakra, nor did he rely on his Six Paths, or the Juubi's chakra. He had reached this point through his own path. The peace of the world. Naito murmured softly. You could say that he had never considered this issue or paid attention to it. Because Naito has always had a sense of a storm coming, whether it was Madara or Kaguya, he felt that they were a sharp blade on his neck, and who knows when they will cut his throat. For this reason, Naito could only work hard. Until he reaches that moment, he will never consider other things. Although he doesn't know how strong Kaguya is, he knew that the Six Paths is nothing compared to her. Maybe he's still inferior compared to him, but it's also impossible for Hagoromo to defeat him. In this realm, the two are almost equal. Whether it's war or peace, the world will constantly progress. Whether it's the people who want to stop the war or the ones who want to start it, they are all working for their personal goals, aren't they? After hearing Naito's words, Hagoromo seemed slightly surprised, then said, "Is this how you see the world?" "Yes." Naito nodded gently, then said, "Everyone has his own goal, but they don't know why they are working hard for it. This what makes this world a failure." Naito's words made the Six Paths fall into a long silence. And after a while, he sighed, then spoke slowly. "Everyone has an answer, regardless of who's right or wrong. This is how it will always work." Speaking of it, even Hamura's descendants had disputes and wars. It seems that they have lost their way too. When Hagoromo mentioned Hamura's descendants and the moon, Naito got a little bit surprised, but immediately understood the matter. Just when he was about to hear what Hagoromo had to say about Hamura's descendants, Naito felt a strong force, pulling his soul away from this realm. That force could not be resisted because it originally came from Naito's body. This was a realm between life and death, only a soul could exist here. Unless Naito is willing to give up on his body, he cannot stay here for a long time. Naito's figure gradually faded, then finally disappeared entirely. Only the Six Paths left here in this white world, continuously sitting cross-legged in the air. After an unknown period, a figure appeared in front of Hagoromo, which looked a bit similar to him, but he didn't have the Rinnegan. "You're back." The Six Paths looked at him and nodded gently. He was the younger brother of the Six Paths, Hamura, and the ancestor of the Hyuga clan. With a bitter smile on Hamura's face, he said, "I didn't expect that my descendants would have such a big disagreement. I wanted to guide them from the shadows, but it turned worse. They tried to use my bloodline and draw all my power out. This will cause chaos to the Shinobi world again." After hearing these words, Hagoromo shook his head slightly and said, "Don't intervene anymore, let it be. Indra's reincarnation, Uchiha Madara, once used my power, but now, things turned out to be not that bad. Since he has decided not to intervene with the world anymore, he always urged to let things go naturally. He knew when Madara awakened the Rinnegan, but he chose not to stop him. After all, he tried to intervene a lot before, whether it was the creation of Ninshu or the separation of the 9 Baijua, everything he has done, brought more misery to the world, even though his means were good. I hope so. Homura laughed bitterly. Although he wasn't as strong as his brother, he was still very powerful. With his strength, he was afraid even that Naito wouldn't be able to deal with it. Homura shook his head, then sighed and sat next to Hagoromo. After a long silence, he closed his eyes. Naito's consciousness returned to the Shinobi world and back to his body. Opening his eyes, Naito stood up, then looked at the sky above. At that moment, he seemed to be able to see the Six Paths' eyes watching the world. In fact, the two had a lot of similarities. The two had rathered to watch the world without interfering. Unless it was something related to Naito, he would be too lazy to bother participating in such things as the Shinobi Wars. Naito calmed down his heart quickly. After all, this event where he met the Six Paths was already expected. Regarding the viewpoint of peace, Naito didn't have time to think because changes in the village made him shocked for a moment. After carefully perceiving the situation in the village, Naito got confused a little bit. It felt like a moment, but it actually has been nearly 2 years. Naito felt extremely shocked. Although he was aware that the process might take a long time, he still didn't expect that it will take 2 years. It seems that the realm where the Six Paths was staying and the Shinobi world didn't have the same flow rate of time. However, Naito didn't pay much attention to it. This 2 years period was nothing, and it wasn't that important to Naito. What is more important, is to open the 7th gate. Instantly, and with one thought, the 7th gate of the reverse Hakimon Tonka got opened. Naito carefully perceived the situation in his body. It seems that under the protection of his sage soul, the opening of the 7th gate didn't have any impact on his body, and it didn't even need to adapt to its power. Once opened, it was perfect. Whoosh! With the opening of the 7th gate, Naito's chakra raised to the peak, and finally reached a higher level. And as soon as it reached that level, Naito Perfect Sage Mode naturally began to transform, and at the same time, all the natural energy between heaven and earth started rushing toward Naito's body. It's difficult for ordinary people to feel the flow of natural energy, but anyone who has once trained his Sage Mode, or undergone the transformation of the Sage Mode, could feel that massive natural energy flowing. At this moment, some people could sense it, such as Kimimaro, Haku, Kushina. Every single one of them turned his head and looked in the direction of the flowing of the natural energy. This is that where HolyOniiSama is staying? Perceiving that insane amount of natural energy, whether it was Kanon, Tsunade, or Kushina, almost everyone looked shocked. The flow was insane. It was massive to the point that some ordinary people could feel the air seems to be depressed. The closest to Naito's room was naturally Kushina. After sensing that violent run of natural energy, Kushina stepped into Naito's room, then hurriedly looked around. Instantly, a smile got drawn on her pretty face. She didn't expect that the moment she will leave that room, Naito will practice for nearly 2 years without eating or drinking. He seemed as if he was dead, which made her even more worried. Even when Kurama told her that Naito was going through some kind of soul transformation, she was still anxious. She has come to check on him every day, but she never dared to bother him or try to awaken him. Feeling that horrifying natural energy, madly getting poured into Naito's body, Kushina knew that Naito should have finally completed his practice, and now he was going through the final stage. Kushina didn't rush toward him but stood quietly at the door, waiting. At the same time, Tsunade and the other who got attracted by the change of the natural energy got also blocked by her. She didn't allow anyone to disturb Naito. In addition to Naito, only a few people, such as Tsunade and Kanon, were able to enter Naito's room. In everyone's perception, the natural energy was flowing wildly at the center of the room where Naito first sat. And the surroundings seemed to have turned into a horrifying swirl. Even the air has become extremely heavy due to this strange gathering of natural energy. At this moment, they could almost feel Naito's vast power, and what was more shocking was that this force seemed to be coming from a deep place as if it was a whole another realm. In the room. At this time, Naito was sitting cross-legged, floating in the air. With this continuous absorption of natural energy, Naito's silver hair started to lose its color, and as it became longer, it looked more like snow white. At the same time, the cloak on his back changed, and a lot of time-forming 6 paths pattern appeared on the back. Immediately after, a black sphere emerged from his back, then a second, then a third. When the 9 truth-seeking balls emerged, suddenly, a black material melted, then converged, and turned into a scepter. Holding the scepter in his hand, Naito stood tall with his new body, as if he was an existence above all things. This is precisely the 6 paths mode. Naito finally opened his eyes slowly. First, he noticed the changes in his clothes, then looked at the scepter that he was holding in his hand. This is the 6 paths mode. Did the merging of the yin and yang create those truth-seeking balls? The scepter in Naito's hand suddenly turned into liquid, and at will, it changed into a sword, then a shield. It was in a state almost exactly the same as that of the Kusanagi sword, but this one was black, while the Kusanagi was gold. Naito's Kusanagi sword can be regarded as one of the treasured tools of the Sage of 6 Paths, because it was almost constructed of natural energy, and even if it doesn't reach the strength of the truth-seeking ball, it will not be easily wiped out by it. The power of the truth-seeking ball comes from the blending of the yin and yang releases, which also contains all the other chakra natures of the wind, thunder, water, fire, and earth. It is the ultimate technique. It could even destroy a reincarnation by the Edo Tensei. Now that Naito has finally awakened his 6 paths mode and got the truth-seeking ball, he had no longer any great use for the Kusanagi sword. At this time, Naito felt that his body was in a strange, elusive state, unlike when he opened the first 6 gates of the reverse Hakemon Tonku. After opening the 7th one, he couldn't feel the power following in his body. What he can feel now is not how strong he is, but how fragile everything else is. Naito could feel that everything around him was very weak, to the point that he could destroy it with a thought. Naito felt like he could even destroy the truth-seeking ball if he wanted. Awakening his sage soul, opening the 7th gate, and finally obtaining his 6 paths mode made Naito reach a stage where even he doesn't know how strong he is. After a while, Naito tried to recover the truth-seeking ball, and the scepter back. With a thought, all of his strength converged, and the orbs and scepter disappeared. His clothes also returned to normal, but his hair didn't change back to how it was. It seems that once the 6 paths mode is possessed, the user will be in full control of his power. This power is completely beyond common sense, it's different from anything in this world. Taking control of his own power, Naito deactivated the 6 paths mode, then muttered. Although he has withdrawn from the 6 paths mode, Naito couldn't feel a reduction in his strength. It was as if he didn't deactivate the 6 paths mode. It was a permanent transformation, just like the perfect sage mode from before. In this mode, Naito can directly levitate in the air without using his shock force, but deactivating the 6 path mode will make him fall on the ground. Naito turned on the 6 paths mode, and his body floated again and continued to understand the power he has just gained. Outside the room, Kushina and the other looked extremely stunned. What is this? If they could sense Naito's power before, now it seems to be completely impossible. In their perception, Naito seemed to be blended with the entire world. The power of the six paths, let alone Kimimaro and Haku, even combined with Tsunade and Kushina, will hardly reach that level. Perceiving his power, they could only sense that it was endless. Of all the people in here, who have only completed the fourth stage of the transformation of the Sage mode and moving toward the final stage, the fifth, Kushina, could barely sense the limit of his power. And that was only possible with the help of the Kyuubi's chakra. Natural energy has wholly restored its calm state. But only Kushina could sense Naito inside the room. As for the others, they could only feel a sense of vastness and nothingness. Tsunade and the others were curious, wondering if Naito had cultivated some kind of a ninjutsu, which caused such a big movement, but the only one who could roughly guess the situation was Kushina. Feeling how the natural energy flow calmed again, and the room got quiet, Kushina opened the door. Naito was sitting there floating in the air, checking his black scepter. But still, he was aware of the situation outside. When Kushina and Tsunade came in, Naito smiled at them and said, "I didn't mean to make such a disturbing to you at the end, but everything is okay now." That's it for this video, guy. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also tell me your recommendations in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.